Welcome to the Hodgypodgy podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Strati, and Merry December, everybody. This is going to be a special month for the Hodgypodgy podcast. We are changing up our schedule, and we are focusing this month, obviously, on Christmas. So, with the changing of the schedule, we are going to do just one episode a week. We're still going to keep our Therapy Thursdays. We're still going to keep our Menagerie Mondays. But 2 episodes a week for a stay-at-home mom that homeschools her kids, that has a husband that works from home, 3 dogs, does a lot of research for her podcast, and for my poor husband that has to deal with my procrastination and then has to upload and deal with the audio and all the stuff of the podcast. 2 episodes a week is a lot. So we are doing 1 a week now. This schedule that we're doing for the month of December is how it's going to be going forward. So we will be doing a Thursday episode 1 week. Then the next week will be a Menagerie Monday. The week after that will be Therapy Thursday, and so on and so forth. So Menagerie Mondays and Therapy Thursdays aren't going anywhere. It's just not going to be both in 1 week. So this month, though, won't really be Menagerie Mondays and Therapy Thursdays. We're kind of taking a little bit of a break from those specifically to focus on Christmas. So Christmas, I absolutely love Christmas. I am one of those annoying people, whatever, judge me, I don't care, that decorate for Christmas as soon as it's November. I feel like the time goes by so fast. I mean, I'm not like Costco. It's not August. I'm not decorating in August, so chill out. But that time of year goes by so fast that I feel like decorating in December, it's like Christmas is already over. It just happens so fast. So we do it in November, and then we just got our real tree. So we have our fake tree in one room, our real tree in another, and it's just Christmas all over. I love it. So do my kids. My husband, he waits till December to decorate the outside of the house. That's his rule. It's fine. But like I said, we will be focusing on Christmas on the podcast. I absolutely love Christmas. I love the feeling of it, the joy of it, my children's joy, just the overall heart of it. I love it so much. So we're going to talk about it. And we're going to talk about, especially this year, we are going to be focusing on classic Christmas movies, the ones that we all watch every single year. We will be talking about them. I'm sure I'm going to miss some or not talk about some of the heavy hitters, but I will be talking about a lot of them. This episode will be about A Christmas Carol, because it is one of my ultimate all-time favorite books and movies. I absolutely love A Christmas Carol. So we'll be talking about that today. I hope you guys learn some cool stuff about it and that it brings back more memories about watching it, or all the different versions of it, which one is your favorite. So we'll be talking about that this week. Then on Monday, we'll be talking about Home Alone. I'm going to try and go into both the first Home Alone and Home Alone 2. Then maybe the Santa Claus movies, depending on the time and the amount of research. I tend to do a bunch of research and have pages and pages of notes. And it takes a lot of time. And I know you guys don't have 4 hours to listen to me talk about these movies. So I try and condense it all as best as I can. But still, have you guys learn some cool stuff, bring back a lot of good memories. So we're going to see if we can fit both sets of movies into Monday's episode. Then on the next Thursday, we're going to talk about the animated Christmas movies. The classics, Charlie Brown, Rudolph, Frosty, all of those. We're going to talk about those, why even as adults, we still love them so much. We can even talk about, if you want to bring it back into Therapy Thursday, the bullying that happened to poor Rudolph. We could talk about that. Poor Rudolph, man. that poor guy. Then on December 23rd, we will be talking about one of the ultimate best Christmas movies in all the land of all time. And if anybody who knows me is listening, you know what movie I'm going to say. Die Hard. Die Hard is my emotional support movie. When stuff is stressful, I'm overwhelmed with everything going on, I will put on Die Hard 1 or 2 and just listen to it while I'm trying to calm myself down, doing stuff in the kitchen or whatever, and it just helps me chill out. Maybe super weird to other people, but I love it. So we will be talking about that movie, and we will also be talking about National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, because that is also a classic. And I grew up on that. I grew up watching it with my mom, so it holds a special place in my heart. And it's also the one I watch on Christmas Eve. So I gotta talk about it the day before Christmas Eve. So we will be talking about those. That's gonna be our schedule for the month. Then obviously in January, we'll get back down to business with our regularly scheduled programming. But for now, we're taking a little bit of a break. I'm gonna talk about the Christmas stuff. I'm also gonna be talking about weird or unusual traditions from around the world. Then we'll also sprinkle in a couple of traditions from friends and family that they do every year. So if you have any of those, any traditions that you absolutely love, send them to me. Comment on the podcast. You can email me. I'll always, in the show notes, you always have the links to all of that stuff. So message me. I want to know what are your favorite Christmas traditions that you grew up with, that you wish you still did, that you do every year with your family. Let me know. I want to know. So, and then I will also try and end each episode with movie recommendations. Maybe ones that you might not have heard of, or just a reminder of like, hey, like these movies exist. If you forgot about them, they're totally awesome. You should watch them. So that's what's happening in these episodes coming up. And we are going to start now talking about Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. This book, this classic, if you're watching on video, if you're just listening, I have the book right here. I have always wanted, like, basically a first edition of A Christmas Carol. So my husband did the best he could and got basically it's red with gold writing on the outside with the gold pages. I don't know the proper term of it, but it's what the first edition would have looked like. So I absolutely love this book. And it is an absolute classic. It was written by Charles Dickens within 6 weeks. He wrote it in 6 weeks. This classic book that has been around for 175 plus years he wrote it in just 6 weeks. To me, that is wild. He wrote it from October to November in 1843. And then it was first published on December 19th in 1843. Then the first edition sold out by Christmas Eve. It was just crazy. But since he wanted it to look so fancy like this, it cost a little bit more to make. And he didn't want to charge a lot for it. So he really didn't make a whole lot on the book for a few years until it started to spread and become more popular around the world. Then he started to finally make money as the word got around about the book and there were more printings of it. But he really didn't make that much money, which is crazy to think. But he wrote this book. He loved to write about things that were real, but bring in his own imagination to it. He had a lifelong devotion to helping the underserved due to his own family experiences with this book. He really wanted to hit home with those that were poor and how hard they had to work. He wanted to make it clear that it didn't take much to be kind and to help somebody that was struggling. He wanted to, in his books, really show people that it wasn't that hard to care. And especially with this book, he had his own family experiences with debtors prison, which forced him to drop out of school as a boy and work at a factory. So he knew what it was like to work in those conditions. He wanted to help open the hearts of the prosperous and powerful towards the poor and the powerless. And I really think this book definitely sums that up. Obviously Scrooge was the rich and he treated the poor very badly. And he wanted to show that it really doesn't take much to change your way of thinking. And once you change, you can really do a lot of good. So he really, this book has so much heart and I absolutely love it. I love all the different versions of it, how it can be adapted into so many different things. There are over at least 135 adaptations of this. There's from silent films to animations to parodies. There's the very first film version dates back to 1901 with Scrooge or Marley's Ghost. Over the years, there's been silent adaptations, early talkies, which I think was like radio, then animated specials, musical versions, TV parodies like Disney's Mickey's Christmas Carol, which is one of my favorites. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The Muppets, also one of my favorites. But there have been so many different versions on talk show or on TV shows. They did different ones. There was one for Sanford and Son. $6 Million Man did a version of it. Family Ties, the Jetsons, DuckTales. There's all sorts of. There was even a couple of ballets and 4 opera versions. So this has been like so many different versions of this, and I have seen a lot of versions of this, man. I did a year where I wanted to see at Christmas time when I wanted to see how many versions I could watch in one Christmas season. And I watched at minimum 21. It may have been higher than that, but 21 is the number that I know I at least reached. 21 different versions of A Christmas Carol. It's insane how many. And there's at least 135. So I haven't even seen anywhere close to the max amount that there is. But it's such a timeless classic, and I hope everybody has seen at least one version. I would be really, really shocked if you haven't seen a single version of A Christmas Carol. I'm gonna put my book down. But it is such a timeless classic. The themes just never go away. They always stay relevant. It's about redemption, kindness, generosity, the importance of human connection. These themes resonate with everybody across generations. There's no generation that can't relate to that. Then, characters like Ebenezer Scrooge and Tiny Tim and all these other characters are expertly drawn, making them relatable and memorable. Like, who would forget poor little Tiny Tim? You certainly can't forget Ebenezer Scrooge. They're just Scrooge's transformation from being this miserly, terrible old man to this kind, generous, big-hearted, gentle giant of a man that just changed everybody's life around him for the better. It's like there's no way of forgetting that. Then, just the way that Charles Dickens tells the story with the 3 ghosts and how he uses that to help forge Scrooge into this amazing human being that he uses all this magic and wonder to help you see Scrooge's changes, and it makes you hooked to the story no matter how many different versions you see. You always hate Scrooge at the beginning and always like fall in love with his big silly heart at the end. There's just no way around it. It's always, no matter how many different versions, it's just like, oh, he's such a jerk, and then you're like, oh my gosh, he's changed and he's amazing, and you always root for him. But there's so many different things to love about this story, and I have so many different versions that I love. But before I get into the versions, I discovered that a few different things. That, first of all, Mark Twain, the author Mark Twain, did not like A Christmas Carol. I was shocked and immediately annoyed when I read this. It said that while A Christmas Carol was received favorably by many of Dickens' author's peers, a 32-year-old Mark Twain was not a fan. Credited as the first writer to do reading tours of his work, Dickens read A Christmas Carol to American audiences during his second visit to the U.S. Twain's review of the now iconic book. There is no heart, no feeling. It is nothing but glittering frostwork. I, as somebody who has loved this forever and finally finished the book, because I loved the movies for years, but I was like, and after watching all the versions, I thought to myself, I don't know what the heck actually happens in the book. And as a fan of the story, I felt like I needed to read the actual book. So I finally read it a couple years ago, and I just reread it before doing this podcast. But what the flip, man? How this whole dang thing is full of heart. I was floored to read that, and like I said, instantly annoyed that somebody could hear it from Charles Dickens himself and think that it had no heart. The whole thing is freaking heart, man. So that made me not like Mark Twain anymore. For now. I'm sure I'll get over it. But then I also learned that Tiny Tim was based off of Dickens' nephew. There was a theory that authors believe that he was based off of Dickens' nephew who he was a sickly child. He did recover, but he was a sickly child. And then also I read somewhere that he had a brother named Fred that was disabled similarly to Tiny Tim as well, that he might have been based off of. There's no like definitive facts. It was kind of, people weren't quite sure, but they said his nephew Henry Burnett Jr. was the one they believe he used as inspiration for Tiny Tim. So, plus also children in poverty at the time. He was a big social reformer and was moved by the plight of children in poverty during the Industrial Revolution. So Tiny Tim kind of represented all of those children, and especially those that like were victims of societal neglect. And it was like a reoccurring theme in Dickens' work. He wanted to show characters that were like that. And so he also likely based Tiny Tim's illness on conditions that were prevalent in his era. Modern doctors speculate that Tiny Tim's symptoms could align with rickets, which is caused by vitamin D deficiency, or tuberculosis, which was common among malnourished children during the 19th century. So I had no idea that he had based him off of potentially his own family. So, and the children that were in poverty. So he really went the extra mile to try and Tiny Tim is really, he's such a frail little sickly soul, and you know it, and you know it from all the versions that you see, but he's such a wise little soul at the same time. And that's, I just, again, I love it. I love it so much. And when he, it's something that Scrooge comes off as a very heartless man, but he sees that little boy and something is like, he can't imagine poor Bob or the world being without Tiny Tim. And that one thing alone changes who Scrooge is. So I think that's really powerful. This little boy who just looks like this sickly little kid, but has such a big heart and such a wise soul, could change this bitter old man in a heartbeat. So I absolutely love that. But we're going to get into the versions of A Christmas Carol, because they're, like I said, I watched at minimum 21 versions, and that was I think that was that had to have been pre-kids. So we're looking at like 11 years ago. I watched these versions. There was obviously the Mickey Christmas Carol. Always watched that every year with my kids. I grew up watching that. Absolutely loved it. But there was one with Vanessa Williams, one with an Ebenezer Scrooge, and then there were, I think I tried to make it through a silent one and I couldn't do it. There's some I was just like, no man, like I think 20 whatever is a good record. Some versions I couldn't do. But there is some debate about what ones are most accurate. A lot of them are fairly accurate. There are some that are completely off course and don't follow the book very closely, but still have the heart of it and still say some parts from the book. Like there was I Googled and I chat GPT'd, and they said that like the 1951 version with Alistair Sims is one of the most accurate ones. It's not. And I do this for you guys. I watched at least six different versions in the past few days, just to refresh my memory of all the differences. And so I read the book, watched the different versions to compare. So if you're wondering like which ones are the most accurate, they each have parts that are accurate. None of them are going to be like straight just like the book. And my son was like, why can't they be just like the book? I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't translate properly. I'm not sure. But there are like the 1951 version, and I don't know how many of you, I don't mind watching stuff like old-timey films or black and white stuff. I don't mind like any version of A Christmas Carol like that. I don't mind it. But the 1951 version, it's called Scrooge. Or like AKA A Christmas Carol, but when you look it up, it's more than likely going to say Scrooge. It's close, but there's still like some big differences in the movie. Like in the book, he has a love interest named Belle, but in the movie, she's named Alice in that version. I don't know why. And then in the book version, they don't show her at the party when he's a teenager. He works at Fezziwig's, and Fezziwig is this gentle soul that throws this big Christmas party for everybody he knows every year. And in a lot of the movies, they show Scrooge with his love interest Belle, but the book never shows that, or never says anything about that. So I feel like the movies added that part in to let people know, kind of like, and I get that. I get wanting to explain some of the things that Dickens just let people assume. So, but in this one with the Alistair Sims, it's Alice, not Belle. I don't know why. Like, stuff like that just irks me. Like, why can't you just name her Belle? Like, that's, I don't get it. But, and then they show her in the present working with people that are sick, but in the book she has a family and a husband who sees Scrooge, and so it's just stuff like that is completely different. And they show Scrooge's sister Fan in that movie. They show her death, her dying after giving birth to Scrooge's nephew Fred, and they show Scrooge walking out before she dies, and she says, she says, please take care of my boy. But he walked out because he was so upset. He didn't hear that. So he ends up kind of hating Fred because he feels like, well, you came into this life and you took my sister's life away. So he always had a little bit of that resentment. But that's obviously not in the book. They don't show her death. He doesn't talk about her death scene in this book. And he also sees Marley before his partner Jacob Marley before he dies as well. That's not in the book either. So they said that that movie kind of adds stuff they think Charles Dickens wouldn't mind seeing. They kind of give more detail, but still you can't say it's one of the most accurate ones because it's definitely not. Like, those are two big parts that affect him, like the one with Belle and seeing her have a family that could have been his, but they leave that part out, and she does something completely different and has a different name. And then they show the deaths, which kind of, and how she said to take care of her son. So it changes things a little bit, but overall, it's not a bad movie. It's just, they do expand on the backstory a little bit, which is, I don't mind too much, because I always like to know more about characters when I watch movies, especially when I love the movie so much. But it's not a bad version. It's fairly accurate, but just know that Belle and Alice, not the same. And we don't read about Marley's, like how Marley dies and all that stuff, or the sister's death. In that we know that they both die, but we don't see it on the page. So that is one of the big classic ones. There's also, I watched one from all the way from 1935. That was an interesting one because they put it was in black and white, but they restored it to color. But since it was so old, it was like really hard on the eyes to watch. But that one was kind of accurate, but they tried to do it within an hour, and trying to do the book justice in an hour doesn't always translate too much. But it was one of the only versions that shows Tiny Tim after he's like passed away, when he's on the bed. There's only 2 versions that I have seen where they show that part, and that part is in the book. So that was one of those things where it's like, they showed that part, but that's not something that you normally see in the movies. So, but one of the other ones they said is like one of the most accurate ones ever. It was so accurate. It was just like the book. But again, I know I'm nitpicky about this stuff, but at the same time, when I get to some of my favorite versions, you're going to be like, what the heck, Lauren? Those aren't anything like the book. I know, but just bear with me. These, and I'm not saying none of these are bad. None of these are bad. The 1935 one, a little rough to watch, a little rough on the eyes. But if you're trying to go for a record like me, it's not bad. But the 1984 A Christmas Carol with George C. Scott as Scrooge, it was pretty good. He was one of the more meaner Scrooges. He was a pretty big jerk, not gonna lie. But it still wasn't completely accurate. So if you don't know, I'm assuming most people know, but I don't want to assume that everyone knows the Christmas Carol stuff. So when Scrooge is visited by technically the second ghost, the first ghost he's visited by is his passed away partner, Marley. But the second ghost is the ghost of Christmas past. And the ghost is typically, in the book, he's a male, but in some of the movies, female. That's fine, whatever. But she takes him back to, in this movie, she takes him back to his school that he grew up in as a child. And in the book, it shows him being alone. Everybody else goes home, but he's stuck by himself reading his books. And then one year, his sister Fan comes running in, and she said, I have come to take you home. Father's so much kinder now. Home is like heaven. And I asked him, I wasn't afraid to ask him if you could come home. And he said, yes, you're to come home and you're to start working as a man in business. And he's completely changed. So, and there's a theory that Scrooge's dad was visited by the three ghosts because he had such a turnaround. Oh, geez. He had such a turnaround. Sorry, I hit my book and then it hit a remote. But he had such a turnaround and was completely different that it made fans of the book wonder if he had also been visited by the three ghosts. So every time I've read that part, I thought that was like, man, he had to have been visited by these ghosts. So I thought that was really interesting that the Scrooge family somehow gets the opportunity to get these ghosts to help them. But in the 1984 version, it shows his father, after his sister says you can come home and they're leaving the school, his father's there at the school, and he said that he was going to start working that Monday, and Fan's like, oh, I thought that we would have more time to spend together. And the father's like, oh, one day or the weekend is enough for both of us, isn't it, boy? And was a total a-hole to Scrooge. And I really didn't like that part because it kind of erases that part in the book where his dad is supposed to be so kind and home is like heaven. And that did not seem like he was going home to a heavenly house. That did not seem like that at all. So that kind of irked me a bit. But it also showed Belle married, which I liked. It showed her married with a bunch of kids. Like it said in the book, a little bit of a different scene. But still, she talked to her husband about seeing Scrooge. And he, said the same thing that was said in the book, which I liked because that isn't done in virtually any of the other versions I've seen. This was one of the only versions that shows her after the breakup and shows her married with kids like it is in the book. So that part is pretty accurate. Then they show their Tiny Tim actually looks really sick. In some of the versions, you're like, first of all, he's not 6 years old. He looks like he's 9. And he definitely doesn't look like he's going to be dead the next year. But this kid looks like he's been close to death, for days. So I did like that part. He looked really fragile. He looked really sick. And then at the end of the movie, he looked well. So there was a difference between the two, which I liked. So, but he says at one point, Tiny Tim says, and it irks me, is that he says, God bless us all, everyone. And he does say the classic line, God bless us, everyone, at some point at the end of the movie, but you gotta just say, he just said the line wrong, and it irked me. It's a little thing, but I say that line all the time in my life. So, but I still like that he looked very sickly. I know that's weird to say about a child, but he looked like Tiny Tim should look. So I appreciated that. And then Scrooge at the end, when he goes to visit his nephew, Fred, and his wife, who he sees in the present with the ghost of Christmas present, basically talking crap about him and how he is this kind of horrible man, but his nephew feels bad for him, and he says that he will always be welcome in his house. But he apologizes to Fred and his wife and talks about his sister and said that he loved his sister so much and he forgot about that for a long time because basically it hurt too much. And he apologized to Fred for it. And they had like a good conversation, and that didn't happen in the book, but I appreciate that movie showing that, and it kind of got me like a little choked up because George C. Scott did such a good job of showing that hurt of all those years lost, all those years that he could have had with his nephew had he not been so angry with him for Fan dying. And he apologized to Fred's wife, and it was just a really nice scene, and I really liked that part of it. That part made that version more likable to me. So if you're gonna watch one of the older versions, the 1984 one is definitely a good one to watch. I really liked that one. So there's every different version, there's going to be different things that are off. How many children Bob Cratchit has with his wife, the name of his wife, the name of his kids, then the name of Fred's wife, or the games that Fred and his family and friends play when Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Present are watching. Then there's just so many different things that whether or not Scrooge's sister is named Fan or Fran. They like to change it to Fran, but it's actually, in the book, it's Fan. So why they just can't leave it alone, I don't know. It's Fan. But then there's so many different things that are different, but the heart of the movies are, normally the same. He realizes from seeing his past how much what he used to be like, what that light in him used to feel like, how easy it was for Mr. Fezziwig. It didn't cost him that much to throw that Christmas party, but how much joy that brought people. And it wasn't a small thing, really, because of how much joy it brought people and what he missed out on not staying with Belle and letting money control him. Then with the present, what his selfishness has done to Bob and his family, and how Bob works so hard and has all these children to provide for and a wife to provide for, and one of his children is super sick and has just this heart of gold. There's just all these different things about this, but that is basically, obviously, always the gist. There's always something like that is similar within all these different versions. Some are obviously going to be pretty different, but the gist of it, there's always the three ghosts. There's always some child that changes their life. The Scrooge's life of the movie. But there's one version that I know it feels weird, and I don't know if I can get anybody to watch this. I actually bought it on Amazon Prime a few years ago, so I own it. But then there's a 1938 version of this movie, and it's one of my favorites because it's so lighthearted and funny. And it's just the guy that plays Scrooge in it, Reginald Owen. I don't expect you to know him because he's probably been dead for I don't know, like 30, 40, 50, 60 years. I don't know. But he was such a great Scrooge, and he was so funny and so likable. And I know he's not supposed to be because he's Scrooge, but he just, you have to see it to truly understand. But the 1938 version, in that movie, Lionel Barrymore, who was the great uncle of Drew Barrymore, was supposed to play Scrooge, but he ended up getting hurt. And so Reginald Owen ended up playing Scrooge. And I thought he was absolutely perfect. Then Bob Cratchit and his wife were actually a real couple in real life. So, like, their little chemistry was real and so fun to watch. But this movie, it's only like an hour and 6 minutes long, but it just has such humor, and it's completely off script. It is not like the book. It doesn't start out like the book, but I like that it starts off with Fred being outside, and he meets Tiny Tim and gets to know Tiny Tim and realizes what a sweet kid he is. And Fred takes Tiny Tim down this hill of ice, and then just gives Tiny Tim because he couldn't do anything, he was crippled, lets him have this slide down this hill and has just a blast doing that with him. And it focuses more on Fred and his fiance and stuff more than any of the versions of the movie do, and which isn't like the book in any way. But I like it. I like how they make him so likable, and he has such a light heart dealing with his grumpy uncle, and he's so sweet to those kids. So he becomes, and you don't see that in any of the other versions. And then he has a good time with Bob in the office, and it's just more lighthearted. So then Bob Cratchit and his wife and their dynamic is just super hilarious. Especially when, again, not like the book, Scrooge comes to their house after being visited by the three ghosts, and everybody thinks that he's lost his ever-loving mind. So Bob runs into the kitchen and tells his wife that he's off his rocker, lost his mind, gone completely mad. And then they hear their children scream. And the wife goes, "Bob, the children." And so Bob takes off to go see what's wrong with the children. And then he talks to Fred, and Fred's like, "You thought he had lost his mind too? He hasn't. He's actually made me partner," which also doesn't happen I don't believe that happened in the book. But he said that he hasn't gone mad. He's just changed, and he was just giving all these toys and food to the kids. And so Bob goes back into the kitchen to find his wife. He's like, oh crap, my wife. And she's hiding in the closet with like a weapon, getting ready, like terrified. And he said, "No, everything's okay." So it's, again, completely different than the book, but it's the humor of it. It just makes you love Scrooge and appreciate his family. And it's a completely different dynamic than any of the other versions, which I love. I just love the way that it's done. I know it's 1938, and the only reason why my husband's seen parts of it, because he doesn't like old movies like that, is because I've had it on. And it's 1938, and it's in black and white, which I know can be hard for people to watch, but it's a good version. Then there is the Muppet version, which is pretty faithful to the original text. Obviously, there's Muppets, and if you haven't seen it, I had the pleasure of being able to see it with my mom in theaters when it came out, and we loved the Muppets when I was growing up. So she would watch the Muppets without me even home, which I watch stuff like kid stuff with my kids not being home too. So, but it is just a really good version. The songs are great. Plus, you can't go wrong with having Kermit as Bob Cratchit and Miss Piggy as Emily Cratchit in this version, and having a little frog be Tiny Tim. You can't really go wrong with that. But it was I was just read today that it was the first movie done without Jim Henson. It was his son that had his directorial debut doing this movie. So the movie was done in honor of Jim Henson, who was the voice of Kermit. And so obviously with him having passed away in 1990 and the movie came out in 1992, they needed somebody else to do the voice of Kermit. So, and I love this story because I love, since I've had people pass away in my life and I've had dreams about them, I love that this happened. So Steve Whitmire, who played the voice of Kermit, he actually had a dream about Jim Henson. So he shared he had a dream the night before his shooting of the first scene as Kermit. And in the dream, he found Henson in a gleaming white hotel lobby and confessed his anxiety about taking on the character, so identified with its creator. Then Jim stopped, and there was a thoughtful gesture Jim would do where he would take both of his index fingers and put them under his chin. And he did that and thought, and he said, "It will pass." And Jim Whitmire recalled, which is exactly what Jim would have said. You would have to really know Jim to know this, but that's exactly what he would have said. Then he turned and said, "I've really got to run." And he took off out the door. I woke up feeling great. I remembered this dream and went in the next day. I did the work and it was smooth. It worked fine. I felt great. Just a little bit of encouragement. Just a little bit of that encouragement. I really think he showed up for me. Like I mean, it was super sad when Jim Henson passed away. Like, he was the heart of that, but his daughter and son kept that going, and that was the first movie that Brian Henson did as director, so I was sure emotional. But the fact that the new voice of Kermit, got a blessing from Jim Henson in a dream like that, I absolutely love that. So it's one of my favorite versions. It is on Disney Plus. If you have Disney Plus and want to watch it, a lot of different versions are available on YouTube, and you can also watch those. Like the 1951 one is, and I think the 84 one, and maybe the 35. But another version I absolutely love is Jim Carrey's version of A Christmas Carol, also on Disney Plus. I love that it's such a Jim Carrey movie, but it still stays pretty faithful to the book. It is the second movie out of all of them that shows the shadow of Tiny Tim on the bed after he's passed away, but it is one of the few that show that, and it's still pretty accurate with most of the book. Obviously there's some where, he gets really small and he's getting chased and stuff, and it goes a little bit extra to be more animated and keep kids engaged, but it has such heart to it, and it still gets me looking at, there's a scene where Bob's heading up to go see Tiny Tim after he's passed away, and he's walking up the stairs and his eyes are bloodshot from crying, and he just stops and he looks directly at Scrooge, even though he's not supposed to be able to see Scrooge, and just looks at him with these eyes that, as a parent, that look. Like, if, like, God forbid anything were to ever happen to one of your, like, that would be how you felt with Bob in that moment. And it's just crazy that animation, that CGI, could get that across to you. But that absolute devastation in his eyes, looking at Scrooge, and Scrooge felt it, and you felt Scrooge feel it, makes me absolutely love that version Plus when he gets shrinked down and he's yelling at the maid that she's fired in his little squeaky voice. I love that. But then there's one of my other favorites, the musical version with Kelsey Grammer. Also totally different than the book. But it still, again, says classic lines from it. But there are big things that are different. Like his dad gets taken away to debtor's prison and tells Scrooge, save your money. You have to save your money. Basically, do what you can to not be poor at all costs. And that is not what happens in the book at all. So, but that's what drives Scrooge to become so hard and rigid and not want to give any money away, is because of what his dad said in that version. But it also has a different ending, which for performance purposes, it had to end that way instead of ending it like it did in the book, because everybody had to gather together and sing. But I also love it because the songs are great, and Jennifer Love Hewitt is in it as Belle, and I've always loved her as an actress, and she's got just a beautiful voice. So, singing voice, and that's just one of those where while it is very different from the book with the extra performances and everything, it's still really entertaining, and I really enjoyed it. So let me know if you've seen any of those versions at all, because I want to know if you guys love these as much as I do. And then I can't forget to talk about, Mickey's version, super short. It's like 30 minutes to keep kids engaged with Scrooge McDuck. And who doesn't love Scrooge McDuck? He is, if you grew up with DuckTales, now there's the newer version that came out a few years ago that I absolutely love and my kids love. Like, that was, like, I think one of the best reboots of any show ever. So if you're gonna watch any reboot of any show, DuckTales, I'm telling you. But that one will always be a classic for us, and we watch it every year. But one that I watch for sure every year is Scrooged, with Bill Murray as Frank Cross, and he, again, completely different than the book. It could not be more different. But it is absolutely hilarious, completely absurd, and completely Bill Murray and the 80s. Like, you have to, if you haven't seen any version of A Christmas Carol, you have to at least see one of the ones I listed that's close to the book, but also watch Scrooged. It is absolutely hilarious. Then I found out some funny stuff about it. The director of the movie actually fired everybody. He fired everybody a couple days before Christmas under the guise that he was going to hire us all back. He made sure that we got the holiday off. He said, because they were filming during Christmas, and he said, "You're fired." Everybody cheered. And he just so this guy, which they thought was awesome. He fired them so they could get the time off, and then after the holidays they got to come back. So I absolutely love that movie. I watch it typically, depending on how time works, I normally watch it either on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day night. That's one of my traditions that my husband and I normally end up watching that together. So, but any of these versions that I've listed are really good ones to watch. You can't really go wrong with The Christmas Carol. It is truly a classic. It's just, some of them really tug at your heartstrings, and just the loss of Tiny Tim and watching Scrooge change, or seeing Scrooge's heart break, like in the musical, watching his nephew just try and get people to guess who he was in this game, and he was described as an ass, or like a donkey, or just all of these negative things, and I know who you're talking about. It's your Uncle Scrooge. And you just watch Kelsey Grammer as Scrooge, you see his whole like, oh God, and his little cold heart breaks, and even though he's a total jerk, your heart kind of breaks for him too, because you're like, oh man, nobody wants to like be looking forward to watching this game and thinking it's fun, and then realize that they're actually making fun of you. And so I really liked that a lot of these movies, you could feel what these characters are feeling and you can sympathize with them. So really can't go wrong with watching any of these versions. But my favorites are 1938 one, or the Jim Carrey Disney version, which is on Disney Plus. A Muppets Christmas Carol, which is fairly accurate with the book, even though Gonzo plays Charles Dickens, which is hilarious, but he says a lot of what comes from the book. So then there's, Mickey's one, of course, Scrooged, then either 1951, 1935 is meh, or 1984 is really good. Also, one I didn't get a chance to watch, but is still very, very good, is Patrick Stewart's version. And I think that was 1999, maybe, that one came out. Also a really good version. But musical one is really good. We just watched that one today. Really liked that one. Jason Alexander, who played George on Seinfeld, plays Marley. And so to see him sing the song Link by Link, like that's a really catchy song. That's one of my favorites to listen to. But to see him sing, you don't really realize that he can sing. So that's always a surprise to somebody who hasn't seen that movie before. But any of those, can't go wrong with watching any of those. I highly recommend watching at least one version of A Christmas Carol. If you have a favorite, let me know. I'd love to hear it. So again, comment or DM me, email me what your favorites are. And if you decide to watch one after listening to this, let me know what you think of them. But we are going to go on to some weird Christmas traditions. And then we're going to end it with a couple movie recommendations. But in Italy, they have, on January 5th, children enjoy a post-Christmas visit from Befana, a good-hearted witch. She's a lot like Santa. She flies through the night on her broomstick, enters the chimneys, and gives candy and presents to good boys and girls, and coal to the baddies. Unlike Saint Nick, Befana wants wine and sausage instead of milk and cookies. That is definitely different. So she wants wine and sausage instead of milk and cookies, which is the least you can do considering she leaves presents and even sweeps up before she leaves. So the only reason I knew who Befana kind of was through the Santa Claus's series with Tim Allen. So otherwise I would have had no idea that Befana was kind of like Santa. And in Italy, they do celebrate Christmas, but they also have Befana on January 5th come and give them presents as well. So I get like 2 Christmases, which is interesting. And she likes wine and sausage. So then in Japan, not a lot of them are Christian, but they do kind of celebrate Christmas, but they do it by eating Kentucky Fried Chicken. So on December 25th, it's a tradition, so much so that the fast food chain generates 5% of its annual business on that single day. Like all good secular holiday celebrations, the trend began with marketing. Back in 1970, the manager of the first KFC in Japan began advertising fried chicken meals as a way of experiencing a traditional Western-style holiday. So that's weird, but interesting. And it caught on. So now KFC on Christmas is so popular, Japanese people have to order weeks in advance lest KFC run out of their signature dish. So that was new information to me. So little fun facts that you can share with people. And then I'm just going to give you 2 movie recommendations. Sorry, I can't keep these under an hour anymore. I can't help it. But hopefully you guys have stuck it out through this. Because Christmas Carol, highly recommend if you want to read the book. Great book. Or at least watch one of the movies. But 2 movie recommendations I do have for you. The first one is A Dickens of a Holiday. It is about typical Hallmark movie, a man and a woman trying to put on this play, A Christmas Carol. It's the 100th anniversary of the play in their town of Dickens. I watch it every year. It's super cute. If you like the Hallmark movies, I love the actors in it. Christopher Palaha is one of my favorite Hallmark actors. I watch whatever movies he's typically in. So I highly recommend that. If you have a Fire Stick or anything like that, you can watch it on the Friendly app, or you can watch it on your phone using the Friendly app. I always get Friendly during the holidays because I can watch all of my Hallmark and Great American Family Christmas movies on there. So if you love Hallmark movies like I do, or Great American Family movies like I do, highly recommend getting that app for December. Then the other movie is one of my new favorites. The first time it was shown was last year, and now it's on Netflix. So if any of you guys have Netflix, you can watch A Biltmore Christmas. Also has Christopher Palaha in it, but I love that movie so much. It's just, it goes back in time. There's the whole time thing, which I like because Back to the Future is my favorite movie. So, and she's able to change time and be with the man that she loves and all this stuff, and it's just, It's a cute movie. I absolutely love it. My family gets sick of it really quick because I watched it like 6 or 7 times last year. So I've spared them this year. I haven't watched it yet, but it's time. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that very soon. So those are 2 movies that I highly recommend you guys watch if you like standard holiday Hallmark movies. So A Dickens of a Holiday and A Biltmore Christmas. Definitely recommend those. 2 thumbs up from me. Netflix or Friendly. You can watch those on. So that's going to be it for this episode. Hope you really enjoyed this A Christmas Carol episode. It is one of those books and movies that just, for me, I absolutely love. It touches my heart, and I love pretty much most of the versions I see. And I think it's just something that everybody should at least watch one version of in their lifetime. But again, I hope you will tune in for the rest of December's Christmas special episodes. We're going to have Home Alone and possibly the Santa Clauses coming up. So I hope you will tune in for Monday's episode. And if you don't like Christmas or anything like that, then bah humbug to you. But if you love Christmas like me and the holidays like me, then I will say, as Tiny Tim said, God bless us, everyone. Bye, guys. See you next episode.